Good luck not starving to death, my husband declared when we were getting divorced. At that moment, I just smiled silently and pulled out of my bag something that even left the judge speechless. I remember that day in the smallest detail. Every word, every gesture, every fleeting emotion on my husband Eduardo's face when he threw those words at me with a contemptuous smirk right there in the courtroom. Judge Carmen, a woman in her 50s with gray at her temples and a stern gaze, lifted her eyes from the documents and gave him a reproachful look over her glasses. But Eduardo paid no attention. He stood there in his expensive charcoal suit, the one I had given him for his last birthday, and looked at me with such superiority, as if I hadn't been his wife for the last 15 years, but just some annoying beggar. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how we ended up in that courtroom, we need to go back a few months, maybe even a few years, or, to be completely honest, to the very beginning of our relationship. Only then I was too much in love to notice the first warning signs. I met Eduardo at a mutual friend's birthday party. I was 23, fresh out of the teacher's college, working as a primary school teacher in an ordinary school on the outskirts of the city. The salary was modest, but I didn't mind. I loved children. I loved my job, and I believe my whole life was ahead of me. Eduardo appeared at that party like a bolt from the blue. Tall, handsome, with a confident stride and a charming smile. He worked at a large construction company as deputy head of sales. When he walked up to me with a glass of rum and coke and suggested we drink to our acquaintance, I felt the ground slip from under my feet. The first months of our relationship felt like a fairy tale. Eduardo showered me with gifts, took me to fancy restaurants, brought me flowers every week. He knew how to court beautifully, what words to say to make my head spin. When 6 months later he proposed, I said yes without hesitation. My parents, simple people from a small town, were thrilled. My father worked as a mechanic at a factory. My mother spent her life as a nurse at a clinic. For them, Eduardo was the embodiment of success, the very prince who would carry their daughter off into a bright future. The wedding was lavish, more than I had ever dreamed of. Eduardo insisted everything be top class. A restaurant in the city center, live music, a sea of flowers. His mother, Patricia, a commanding and demanding woman, personally oversaw every detail. She was chief accountant at a large firm and was used to having everything done perfectly. From day one, she made it clear that I had to live up to the status of her son's wife. No cheap dresses from mass market shops, no supermarket cosmetics. Everything had to be solid, expensive, prestigious. For the first years of marriage, I tried my best. I kept working at school, but most of my paycheck went into making sure I looked presentable in my husband's and mother-in-law's eyes. I bought pricey cosmetics, went to beauty salons, updated my wardrobe. At first, Eduardo was pleased. He proudly introduced me to his colleagues and business partners. A beautiful, well-groomed schoolteacher wife added to his respectability. But gradually, something began to change. Eduardo started working late more often, citing important projects and urgent meetings. Weekends he more and more often spent with friends, playing golf or going fishing. When I tried to talk to him about us spending more time together, he brushed me off, saying I didn't understand how important these informal gatherings were for his career. 3 years into our marriage, I got pregnant. It wasn't planned, but I was happy. I thought a child would bring us closer again, return the warmth and intimacy that had faded. But when I told Eduardo about the pregnancy, his reaction shocked me. He turned pale, then flushed, and then coldly asked if I was sure I wanted to give birth right now. Turns out he had big career plans, was aiming for a department head position, and a baby was absolutely not part of the plan. Patricia backed him up. She came to our place specifically to explain how unreasonable I was. A baby means huge expenses, she said. You'll need a nanny because I'm working and can't help. Eduardo needs to focus on his career, not be distracted by crying at night. Maybe in a few years when he's higher up the ladder, when there's more money. I cried for 3 days, then pulled myself together and made a decision. I would have the baby. This was my child, and I wanted it. If Eduardo didn't want our baby, I'd manage on my own. After all, I had a job and I had parents who would always support me. When I told Eduardo my decision, he just nodded silently. He didn't argue, but I saw the coldness in his eyes. From that day, he distanced himself completely, slept in the guest room, saying I snored because of the pregnancy, stopped asking about my health, skipped the ultrasounds, never helped with choosing a name. Our daughter was born in April, tiny, fragile, with huge brown eyes. I named her Valentina. Eduardo came to the hospital only on the 3rd day, brought flowers and an envelope of money. "This is for the first little things, diapers and so on," he said, then turned around and left. Patricia never came at all, just sent a message congratulating me and wishing good health. The first months after birth were hell. Valentina slept poorly, cried often. I sank into postpartum depression, which no one noticed or treated. Eduardo came home late, sometimes didn't stay the night at all, saying he crashed at a friend's place so as not to disturb me and the baby. He'd leave money for the household on the kitchen table, as if I weren't his wife, but just the housemaid. My parents came to help however they could. My mother took unpaid leave and stayed with Valentina while I tried to pull myself together. My father brought groceries, did small repairs around the house. They could see that something was wrong in our family, but they stayed silent, not wanting to interfere. Only my mother sometimes hugged me and whispered that everything would get better, that I just needed to hold on. When Valentina turned 1, I went back to work, placed her in daycare, and returned to my school. My colleagues welcomed me warmly. The children were happy. Work became a lifeline for me, a place where I felt needed and important. At home, however, the atmosphere grew more and more tense. Eduardo openly expressed his dissatisfaction with how little I earned. He had finally received the long-awaited promotion, became head of the department, and his salary multiplied. But instead of rejoicing and sharing his success with his family, he became even more arrogant and demanding. He began criticizing my appearance, saying I had gained weight after giving birth, that I dressed like a provincial schoolmarm, that I should take better care of myself. At the same time, he never gave me money for beauty salons or new clothes, insisting I should manage on my own salary. When I tried to explain that my pay barely covered baby food, diapers, and clothes for Valentina, he shrugged and said that was my problem. I was the one who had wanted a child, so now I should be the one to provide for her. Patricia fully supported her son. She came to visit once a month, scanned the apartment with a critical eye, and made remarks. Dust on the shelves, toys scattered on the floor, dinner not refined enough. With her granddaughter, she barely interacted at all, keeping her distance as if Valentina wasn't her own flesh and blood, but someone else's child. So the years went by. Valentina grew into a smart, curious girl. She longed for her father's attention, but Eduardo brushed her off like an annoying fly. He had no time for children's games or conversations. He was busy building his career, networking, making money that he spent on himself. Expensive suits, watches, gadgets, a new car he bought for his next promotion, vacations with friends at luxury resorts where he never took me or our daughter. I kept trying to hold the family together. For Valentina's sake, I told myself, she needed a father, a whole family. I endured the humiliations, the coldness, the indifference, smiling in family photos that Eduardo sometimes posted on social media to keep up the image of a model family man. I cooked dinners he didn't eat, bought him gifts for holidays that he accepted with indifference. But then something inside me broke. It happened on Valentina's birthday. She was turning 7, had just started first grade. I organized a small party at home, invited her classmates, baked a dulce de leche cake, decorated the apartment with balloons. Valentina kept waiting for her father, running to the window again and again, watching to see if he was coming. Eduardo had promised to be there by 4 o'clock with a gift. At 4, he wasn't there. At 5, still nothing. By 6, Valentina wasn't smiling anymore, only gazing sadly at the door. At 7, the guests started leaving. At 8, I put my crying daughter to bed, promising her that Daddy would definitely congratulate her tomorrow, that he was just stuck at an important meeting. Eduardo came home at midnight, drunk. He smelled of expensive perfume, not his perfume. On the collar of his shirt, I noticed a lipstick stain. He didn't even ask how the party went, just stumbled into the bedroom and collapsed on the bed without undressing. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, thinking about how my life had come to this, how I had allowed myself to become a shadow, an accessory to a man who neither loved nor respected me. In the morning, I made my decision. I would file for divorce. Valentina deserved better than to watch her mother allow herself to be humiliated. She needed to grow up knowing that a woman has the right to respect and love, and is not obligated to endure rudeness and indifference just to keep up the illusion of a family. When I told Eduardo about my decision, he laughed at first. "You won't last a week without me. You'll come crawling back on your knees begging for forgiveness." When he realized I was serious, his tone changed. He started threatening me, saying he would take the apartment we had bought during the marriage, since he had put in most of the money, that he would take Valentina, prove I was a bad mother, incapable of providing for a child, that his mother, Patricia, had connections in child services and would easily prove my incompetence. I stayed silent, listening to his threats. Inside me, a strange certainty was growing, as if all those years of humiliation and pain had hardened me, made me stronger. I no longer feared Eduardo, no longer feared being alone. The only thing I was afraid of was losing Valentina. But I knew I would fight for my daughter to the very end. The following weeks were filled with legal consultations, gathering documents, preparing for court. I hired a lawyer, Rosarita, an experienced woman specializing in family law. She listened carefully to my story, studied the documents, and said I had a good chance. Valentina would stay with me. That was almost certain. The apartment was trickier, but we could try to prove that my contribution to the family budget had been substantial, even if not in financial terms. Eduardo, meanwhile, didn't sit idly by. He hired one of the best lawyers in the city, a man with the reputation of a shark, capable of winning even the most hopeless cases. Patricia pulled all her strings. They were digging for dirt on me, looking for any pretext to portray me in a bad light. But I had an ace up my sleeve, something no one knew about, not even my lawyer. A document I had accidentally found months earlier while sorting through old papers in Eduardo's study. At the time, I hadn't given it much thought, just slipped it back into the folder. But now that the war had begun, I realized it could become my greatest weapon. The night before the trial, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, thinking about how our lives would change after tomorrow. Valentina was asleep in the next room, breathing softly in her sleep. I got up, went to her crib, tucked the blanket around her. My little girl, my reason for living. For her, I was ready to go through anything. In the morning, I woke with a strange sense of calm. I put on my best suit, strict but elegant, the very one I had bought with my last savings for parent-teacher meetings at school. I styled my hair neatly, applied light makeup. In the mirror, I no longer saw a downtrodden housewife, but a confident woman ready to fight for her happiness. I took Valentina to my parents. My mother hugged me goodbye, whispering that everything would be all right. My father shook my hand silently, but in his eyes I read support and pride. They knew what I had been through and were glad I had finally decided to change my life. I arrived at the courthouse half an hour before the scheduled time. Rosarita was already waiting in the lobby. She went over our strategy one more time, reminding me to answer clearly and calmly, not to fall for provocations. I nodded, but my thoughts were elsewhere. In my handbag lay that very document, wrapped in a transparent sleeve. I could feel its weight, though it was only a single sheet of paper. Eduardo showed up 5 minutes before the hearing began. Patricia came with him, wearing her best raven black suit, her hair perfectly styled, her face frozen in disdain. They walked past me without even glancing in my direction, as if I were invisible. Eduardo's lawyer, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, gave me a quick assessing look and whispered something to his client. Eduardo smirked. When we entered the courtroom, my heart started racing. A small room with high windows, a strict atmosphere, the judge's desk raised above us. Judge Carmen was already in her place, reviewing the documents. Her gray hair was neatly pinned up, her suit formal, her gaze sharp behind her glasses. She lifted her head, looked over the room, and announced the start of the session. Eduardo's lawyer spoke first. He went on at length, arguing convincingly that his client, a successful executive, had supported the family all these years, while his wife failed to appreciate his efforts or support his career ambitions, that she had insisted on having a child against her husband's wishes, disrupting his life plans, that her meager teacher's salary was nothing compared to Eduardo's income, and she had no moral right to claim the property acquired during the marriage. I listened in disbelief at how twisted the facts were, but Rosarita had warned me this would happen. She placed a hand on my wrist, urging me to stay calm. Her turn would come. Then Patricia took the floor. She spoke of her devoted son, Eduardo, how hard he worked, how distressed he was about the family breaking apart, and how ungrateful I was, unable to appreciate what I had. She claimed I was a poor housekeeper, that I failed to create comfort in the home, that I neglected myself, that our daughter often fell ill because of my carelessness, that I cared more about my job than my family. Each word struck me like a slap in the face, but I kept silent, fists clenched under the table. Valentina didn't fall sick more often than other children, and when she did, I was always by her side, taking leave from work, sitting at her bedside night after night. And my work was the only thing that helped me keep my sanity in the hell they dared to call a family. Finally, it was Rosarita's turn. She stood, adjusted her glasses, and began speaking calmly, deliberately, presenting facts and figures, that throughout the marriage her client had worked and contributed to the family budget, that she had borne all responsibility for raising the child because the father refused to participate in expenses, that she had maintained the household, cared for the child, and created the conditions that allowed her husband to build his career, that her contribution could not be measured in money alone. Eduardo listened with thinly veiled irritation. When Rosarita mentioned his absence from his daughter's birthday, he snorted and muttered something about an important meeting. The judge gave him a stern look, calling him to order. Then it was my turn. I stood, my knees trembling, and began to tell my side of the story. How I had loved my husband, how I had tried to preserve our family, about the coldness and indifference that replaced love, about how Eduardo turned away from me and from our daughter, how he belittled and demeaned me. My voice shook, but I went on. When I finished, Eduardo's lawyer asked to give his client the floor. The judge nodded. Eduardo rose, squared his shoulders, and declared that I was hysterical, that I exaggerated everything, that he had always cared for the family, but I had failed to appreciate it, that if he had been cold, it was only because I hadn't lived up to the status of a successful man's wife, that he was even willing to forget all grievances and forgive me if only I came to my senses and withdrew the divorce petition. And then he said the words that became the last straw. He turned to me with a contemptuous smirk and said that if I insisted on going through with the divorce, I shouldn't expect his help, that he would make sure the apartment stayed with him and I would be left with nothing. And then, looking me straight in the eyes, he added, "Good luck not starving to death." The room fell silent. The judge frowned, ready to rebuke him, but I was already rising from my seat, slowly, calmly, feeling all eyes on me. I opened my handbag, the one I had bought before marriage and carried all these years because I couldn't afford a new one. I pulled out the transparent sleeve with the document. I walked up to the judge's desk and placed the paper before her. Carmen took it, began reading. Her eyebrows shot up, her eyes widened. She read it again, then looked at me over her glasses. Behind me, noise erupted. I turned and saw Eduardo leap to his feet. His face drained of color, then flushed crimson. He was shouting something, but I couldn't hear the words. I only saw his mouth open and close, his lawyer waving his hands, trying to calm him, Patricia clutching at her chest. Rosarita came to me, took me gently by the elbow and helped me back to my seat. I sat down, feeling an odd emptiness, as if all the strength I had been storing for this moment had suddenly left me. But along with it came relief. I had done it. I had shown the true face of the man who had spent years pretending to be a successful businessman and model family man. The judge demanded silence in the courtroom, then asked Eduardo's lawyer to approach and showed him the document. The man read it, and his confidence noticeably faded. He returned to his client and whispered something in his ear. Eduardo shook his head furiously, but the lawyer was adamant. Carmen announced a 30-minute recess to study the new evidence. Everyone left the courtroom. I remained seated, unable to move. Rosarita sat down beside me and took my hand. After 30 minutes, the hearing resumed. The judge looked even sterner than before. She addressed Eduardo, asking whether he acknowledged the document's authenticity. My husband, almost ex-husband by then, sat hunched over, staring at the floor. His lawyer answered for him, saying an expert analysis was required. The judge nodded, saying an examination would be conducted, but the preliminary review indicated the document was genuine. Then she turned to me, asking how the document had come into my possession. I stood and told the truth, how several months earlier I had been searching in Eduardo's office for the apartment papers to apply for a subsidy, how I had stumbled upon a folder hidden in the farthest corner of a drawer, how curiosity led me to open it, and how I discovered that document among other papers. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it and put it back. But when the divorce process began and Eduardo started making threats, I remembered what I had found. The judge listened attentively and nodded. Then she turned to Eduardo and his lawyer, asking if they had anything to add. The lawyer requested a postponement to prepare a position in light of the new circumstances. But Carmen refused. She said there was already sufficient evidence to make a ruling. She began to read the decision. The marriage was dissolved. The child would remain with the mother. The father was obligated to pay alimony amounting to 30% of all income. The apartment was to be divided equally. But since the child was staying with the mother, she had the right either to buy out the father's share at market value or to live in the apartment until the child reached adulthood. But that wasn't all. The judge paused, fixed Eduardo with a stern look, and added that the case materials would be forwarded to the relevant authorities for investigation of the information contained in the submitted document, and that the defendant should be prepared for possible consequences. Eduardo jumped up, trying to say something, but his lawyer held him back. Patricia sat with a stone face. Only her lips trembled. They quickly left the courtroom without even glancing at me. I remained seated, unable to believe it was over. Rosarita hugged me, congratulated me on the victory. She said I had done well, that not every woman would have found the strength to fight to the end. But I didn't feel the joy of triumph, only fatigue and emptiness. Leaving the courthouse, I stopped on the steps and lifted my face to the sun. It was a warm September day, the trees just beginning to turn yellow. In the distance, I could hear the city's noise. Car horns, voices. Life went on, and my life, too, went on. Only now it was different. Free from humiliation, lies, and pretense, I took out my phone and dialed my mother's number. The moment I heard her voice, I couldn't hold back my tears. But these weren't tears of grief or resentment. They were tears of relief. My mother immediately understood that everything was all right. She told me Valentina was waiting for me, that they had baked a pie, my favorite with banana and cinnamon, that my father had bought champagne to celebrate the beginning of a new life. On the way to my parents, I thought about that document that had changed everything, about how a chance discovery had become my salvation, about how life sometimes offers unexpected gifts. You just have to be ready to accept and use them. Valentina met me at the door, throwing herself into my arms. I lifted her up, spun her around, inhaling the scent of her hair. My girl, my reason for living. For her, it had been worth enduring everything. Now we would have a different life, maybe not as financially comfortable, but surely happier and more honest. That evening, after Valentina had gone to sleep, I sat in the kitchen with my parents, drinking coffee and eating pie. My mother asked about the details of the trial. My father remained silent, but I could see the pride in his eyes. They had always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. I told them about the document, about Eduardo's reaction and the judge's words. My mother shook her head. I'm not surprised. I always felt something was wrong with Eduardo, but I didn't want to interfere in your life. My father added, now Eduardo will have to answer for his actions. And that's only fair. That night, I couldn't fall asleep for a long time. I lay in my childhood room, staring at the wallpaper with tiny flowers I had known since I was little. I thought about what lay ahead for me and Valentina. We would need to find a new apartment, simpler, smaller. I might have to take on extra work, tutoring or something else. But I wasn't afraid of difficulties. After everything I had been through, everyday problems seemed trivial. In the morning, Rosarita called. She said Eduardo's lawyer had contacted her, offering a settlement. Eduardo was willing to give up his share of the apartment in exchange for my agreement not to spread information about the document and not to prevent him from seeing his daughter. I thought about it. The apartment would solve many problems, but as for seeing his daughter, Valentina had the right to know her father, however he was. And if Eduardo truly wanted to see her, I wouldn't stop him, but only under my supervision and only if it wouldn't harm the child. I told Rosarita I agreed, but under conditions. Visits only in my presence, no more than once a week, and only if Valentina herself wanted it. A week later, we signed the settlement. The apartment became fully mine. Eduardo was bound to pay alimony and not to challenge the conditions. He came to the signing looking haggard, dark circles under his eyes. He didn't look at me, quickly signed the papers, and left. Patricia wasn't with him. Later, I learned from mutual acquaintances that Eduardo had run into serious trouble. After the trial, he was summoned by the tax authorities, who began investigating his financial activities. The company he worked for quickly got rid of him, not wanting to be drawn into a scandal. Patricia, too, distanced herself from her son, afraid for her own reputation. But that was no longer my problem. I had my own life, my own worries. Valentina and I returned to our apartment. I renovated it. Nothing fancy, but cozy. Painted the walls in warm pastel tones, bought new furniture at a sale, hung cheerful patterned curtains. The apartment was transformed. It became truly our home. Valentina entered second grade. She did well in school and made new friends. Sometimes she asked about her father, why he didn't live with us. I always answered honestly but delicately that sometimes adults realize they are better off living apart, but that didn't mean her father had stopped loving her. She would nod, as if she understood. Children are often wiser than adults. Eduardo tried to see his daughter a few times. The first time he came was a month after the divorce. He brought an expensive doll, trying to make up for things with a gift. Valentina took it, thanked him, but stayed wary. She remembered how her father had missed her birthday, how he yelled at her mother. Children remember everything, even when adults think otherwise. The meeting was tense. Eduardo didn't know what to say to his daughter, and Valentina answered in short phrases. After an hour, he left, promising to come the next week. But he didn't. Then he showed up a month later, then 2. Gradually, his visits became fewer until they stopped altogether. I didn't insist. If a man doesn't want to be a father, you can't force him. Valentina didn't suffer much either. She had me, her grandparents who adored her, and my old classmate Concepcion, now my closest friend, who became almost a second mother to Valentina. She had a full, happy life. And then Alejandro entered our lives. I met him at a school meeting. He was the father of one of Valentina's classmates, a widower raising his son alone. Tall, a little stooped, with a kind smile and tired eyes. We started talking after the meeting and found we had much in common. We were both teachers. He taught high school physics. We were both single parents. We both loved reading, walking in the park, drinking coffee with pastries. At first, we were just friends. We saw each other at school as events, sometimes took the children to the park together, later went to the cinema, to the theater. Valentina became close with his son, Manuel. They did homework together, played. Gradually, without even noticing, we became a family, unofficially without stamps and passports, but a real family. Alejandro never tried to replace Valentina's father, never imposed himself. He was simply there. He helped with homework, taught her to ride a bike, read bedtime stories. Valentina grew attached to him, first calling him Uncle Alejandro, then simply Alejandro, and Manuel became the brother she never had. 2 years after the divorce, I received a letter from Eduardo. He was writing from another city where he had moved after all his troubles. He asked for forgiveness for everything that had happened. He wrote that he realized his mistakes, regretted the time lost. He asked if he could come see Valentina. I showed the letter to my daughter. By then she was 10, old enough to decide for herself. Valentina read it, thought for a while, then said she didn't mind meeting him, but she didn't want to be alone with him. I wrote back to Eduardo that he could come, but the meeting would be in a cafe, in my presence. He arrived a week later, aged, worn down, dressed simply. The old gloss and arrogance were gone without a trace. He brought Valentina books, the kind she actually liked. He spoke quietly, looked at his daughter with such sorrow that I almost pitied him. But that pity was distant, the kind one feels for a stranger fallen on hard times. Valentina behaved politely but reservedly. She told him about school, about her friends. She didn't mention Alejandro, and I was grateful for that. This was our life now, and Eduardo no longer had the right to interfere. The meeting lasted an hour. As he left, Eduardo said he would write if Valentina didn't mind. She nodded. And he really does write. Once a month, a letter comes, sometimes with a small gift. Valentina answers, briefly, but she does. Maybe one day they'll build some kind of relationship. But that will be their story, not mine to meddle in. As for me, my story goes on. Each day is filled with simple joys. Morning coffee with Alejandro while the kids get ready for school, lessons with first graders and their shining eyes as they learn to read, evening walks with the whole family, quiet kitchen conversations after the children are asleep. Sometimes I think back to that day in court. Eduardo's face when I pulled out the document, the judge struck speechless, my own trembling and determination at the same time. That was the turning point of my life, the moment when I stopped being a victim and became the mistress of my own destiny. I still keep that document in a bank vault just in case, though I doubt I'll ever need it again, but it reminds me that everyone has secrets, and sometimes those secrets can save or destroy. The key is knowing when and how to use them. And what was in that document, that's another story. A story about how a successful manager turned out to be someone else entirely, about the ugly truth behind the polished facade, about how a chance discovery can change everything. But that's not the main thing. The main thing is that I made it. I broke free from a toxic relationship, protected myself and my daughter, built a new life. And if my story helps even one woman in a similar situation find the strength to fight back, then everything I went through was not in vain. Valentina is growing up a happy child. She has a loving family, friends, hobbies. She doesn't remember the time when her father yelled at her mother and her mother cried at night. And that's good. Children should remember the good. Let the bad stay in the past. Alejandro proposed to me last Christmas. Quietly, without fanfare, he simply handed me a ring and asked if I would be his wife. I said yes, not because I needed a stamp in my passport or the status of a married woman, but because I love this man and want to spend my life with him. The wedding will be modest, just close family, no lavish celebrations or expensive outfits. Alejandro and I have both been through the pomp of grand weddings before. We know happiness isn't found in that. Happiness is waking up each morning next to the person you love, solving problems together, celebrating successes, raising children in love and understanding. Patricia tried to contact me after everything that happened. She wrote long letters, full of both excuses and accusations, that I had ruined her son's life, that because of me, he had lost everything. But then, in the same breath, she wrote that she was ready to forgive me if I helped Eduardo return to a normal life. I didn't respond. I had nothing to say to her. Later, I heard that she, too, had left town, sold her apartment, and moved in with her sister in another province. They said her health had suffered after all the upheaval. I don't pity her. She chose her path, a path of manipulation and lies, and she got what she deserved. I chose another path, the path of honesty, dignity, and love. Yes, it was hard, full of trials, but it brought me to where I am now, to happiness, peace, and harmony. In the evenings, while the children do their homework and Alejandro grades his students' notebooks, I sometimes sit by the window with a cup of coffee and think about how strange life is, how something that feels like the end of the world can turn out to be the beginning of something new and beautiful, how important it is not to give up, even when it seems there is no way out. But I'm getting too far ahead. Let me return to the moment when it all began, to the document that changed everything, to the events that followed that fateful hearing. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Yes, I had won the case. Yes, Valentina was staying with me. Yes, the apartment was mine as well. But Eduardo's look as he left the courtroom did not bode well. In his eyes, there wasn't just anger or resentment. There was a cold, calculating fury of a man unaccustomed to losing. The next day after court, I returned to our apartment to collect Valentina's things. She was still living at my parents', and I wanted to create a sense of normalcy for her in the new reality of our life. The key trembled in my hand as I opened the door. Inside, it was quiet and empty. Eduardo had already taken his belongings the night before, leaving only the furniture and appliances. I walked through the rooms, gathering my daughter's toys, clothes, and books. In the bedroom we once shared, on the vanity lay an envelope with my name on it. I recognized my husband's handwriting immediately, neat, with a slight slant to the right. Once upon a time, I had cherished his love notes, rereading them in moments of sadness. Now just seeing his handwriting made my stomach twist with dread. Inside was a short note. "You think you've won? This is only the beginning. I know about your secret. I know where you got that document. And soon everyone else will know too. Let's see how you sing then." My hands shook. What was he talking about? What secret? I really had found the document in his office by accident. Or did he think otherwise, that I had deliberately searched through his papers, looking for dirt? But even if I had, would that be a crime? It was our shared home. I had a right to know what my husband was up to. I slipped the note into my bag and hurried to finish packing. The uneasy feeling wouldn't leave me. Eduardo was plotting something, and it couldn't mean anything good. I had to be ready for anything. That evening, Rosarita called. Her voice was troubled. "We have a problem. Your ex-husband's lawyer has filed an appeal. They're contesting the court's decision on the grounds that the document you submitted was obtained illegally. They claim you broke into Eduardo's private office without his consent and stole confidential papers." My heart sank. So that was his plan. But I didn't steal anything. I lived in that apartment. It was my home, too. The papers were in an unlocked drawer. "I understand," Rosarita said, "but they insist the office was Eduardo's private space, off limits to you, and that the document is part of his work files, which you had no right to take." I sank onto the couch, my legs weak. Was it all about to start again? Court hearings, threats, battles. What do we do? Prepare for a new round. But I have an idea. We need to prove the document directly concerns your family matters. For that, we'll have to disclose its contents in more detail. Are you ready for that? I thought it over. The document really was unusual, and its contents could not only help me in court, but completely destroy Eduardo's reputation. Was I ready to go that far? On the other hand, had he left me any choice? Yes, I'm ready. Good. Then we'll meet tomorrow morning in my office and discuss strategy. After the call with my lawyer, I phoned my mother and told her I would be delayed with the move. I didn't mention the new problems. I didn't want to worry them. Valentina picked up the receiver and chattered happily about how she and her grandfather had gone to the zoo. Her carefree voice was like balm for my soul. For her sake, I had to stand strong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I scrolled through old photos on my phone, trying to understand when it had all gone wrong. Here we were by the sea, 6 months after the wedding, both tanned, happy, embracing against the sunset. Here was our first apartment, a rented one-room flat on the outskirts. We had just finished renovating it ourselves, standing in front of the freshly painted wall, splattered with paint, but smiling with satisfaction. And here was Valentina, just born, a tiny bundle in the maternity ward. Eduardo held her awkwardly, clearly afraid he might drop her. On his face was a mix of confusion and tenderness. When did he change? Or had he always been this way, just pretending well? These questions tormented me, gave me no peace. I wanted to believe there had once been real love between us, that not everything had been a lie or a performance. Otherwise, how could I go on, living with the sense that 10 years of my life had been wasted? The next morning, I arrived at Rosarita's office earlier than our scheduled meeting. Her secretary, a sweet girl with curly red hair, offered me coffee. I agreed, more to have something to do with my hands than from any real desire to drink it. Sitting in the waiting room, I studied the framed diplomas on the wall and thought about how quickly life could change. Just a month ago, I had been a married woman, unhappy but still married. And now here I was, sitting in a lawyer's office, preparing for another battle for my right to a normal life. Rosarita appeared exactly on time, as always composed, in a charcoal suit, a folder of documents tucked under her arm. "Come in," she said. "We have a lot of work to do." Her office was cozy despite its professional atmosphere. Flower pots lined the windowsill, family photos hung on the wall, her husband, 2 grown children, grandchildren. A normal, happy family, the kind I once dreamed of. "So," Rosarita began, laying papers out on the desk, "let's go over again exactly what the document you presented in court represents." I took a deep breath. The moment of truth. It's a contract. A fake real estate purchase agreement signed under a false name. Eduardo used it to launder money through the construction company he worked for. Rosarita nodded, making notes in her notebook. "And you are certain this document is authentic?" "Absolutely. It has Eduardo's signature, the company's seal, the date. He supposedly was on a business trip in another city then. but I clearly remember those days. He was at home, sick with the flu. I was nursing him with warm milk and honey. That's good. Very good. If we can prove he lied about that trip, it will confirm the transaction was fictitious. Do you have any evidence that he was at home during those days? I thought for a moment, then remembered. Receipts. I still have the pharmacy receipts. I bought him medicine. There should be dates on them. Excellent. Find them and bring them to me. Every little detail can play a decisive role. We spent another hour discussing our defense strategy. Rosarita explained that the appeals court could overturn the lower court's ruling if it deemed the document inadmissible as evidence. But if we could prove that the document was directly tied to family well-being, that the money obtained illegally had been used for household needs, then we stood a strong chance of upholding the original decision. Leaving the lawyer's office, I went to my parents' house. I needed to sift through all the old receipts, bills, any scraps of paper that might support my case. My mother met me at the door and immediately read my face. Trouble again? I nodded, unable to trust my voice. She hugged me tight as she had when I was a child. It's all right, darling. We'll get through this. We're not the kind who give up. Her words gave me strength. She was right. We weren't the kind to give up. My parents had worked their whole lives, honestly earning every cent, raising me with love but also with discipline, teaching me that nothing in life comes easily, that everything must be fought for, and I would fight. Valentina came running from her room, flung her arms around my neck. Mommy, you're here. Are we going to live together now? Soon, sweetheart. Very soon. Mommy just has to finish some things first. Will Daddy come to us? The question caught me off guard. What could I tell a 7-year-old girl? How could I explain that her father would be living elsewhere now, that he no longer loved her mother, if he ever had? Daddy will live in another place, but he loves you and will come visit. Valentina frowned, clearly unsatisfied with the answer, but said nothing. She had always been sensitive, understanding more than adults gave her credit for. I spent the rest of the day going through old boxes of documents my parents kept stored in the attic. My mother never threw anything away, and now that habit turned out to be invaluable. I found not only pharmacy receipts from that unlucky period, but also a medical record from the clinic where Eduardo had been treated. Flu complicated by bronchitis, 2 weeks of sick leave. Exactly at the time when, according to the contract, he was supposed to be in another city closing a $1 million deal. By evening, I had gathered an entire folder of evidence, receipts, medical records, even photos from my phone showing Eduardo lying in bed with a thermometer. I had sent them to his mother at the time so she wouldn't worry. The irony of fate, Patricia, without realizing it, had become a witness against her own son. The next day, I brought everything I'd collected to Rosarita. She carefully studied each slip of paper, each photograph. This is exactly what we need. Now, they won't be able to claim the document has nothing to do with family matters. The money from the fake deal went toward the purchase of the very apartment we're fighting over now. But won't that make me an accomplice? I lived on that money, even if I didn't know where it came from. No, you're safe. You didn't know and couldn't have known about your husband's schemes. On the contrary, the fact that he hid the source of the money from you works in your favor. He deceived not only the state, but also his own family. The appeals hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Those 14 days stretched like 14 years. I tried to live a normal life, returned to work at school, brought Valentina back from my parents. We settled into our apartment, tried to set up our routine, but the shadow of the upcoming trial hung over me, never letting me relax. Eduardo didn't try to contact me or his daughter during that time. Valentina asked about him less and less, adjusting to the new reality. Children are remarkably adaptable, far better than adults at adjusting to change. Patricia, on the other hand, called constantly. sometimes threatening, sometimes begging me to withdraw the divorce, sometimes promising me riches if I gave up my claims. I stopped answering when I saw her number, but she didn't give up. She began writing long messages. "You destroyed my son's life. Because of you, he lost his job, his reputation, his future. How can you sleep at night knowing you doomed your child's father to disgrace and poverty?" I didn't respond. What could I say? That he had only himself to blame? That he was reaping what he had sown? She would never understand, never accept it. To her, Eduardo would always be the perfect son, and I, the villain who ruined his life. 3 days before the appeal, something unexpected happened. In the evening, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and froze. On the landing stood Eduardo, but not the well-groomed, arrogant Eduardo I had known. This man was unshaven, his eyes red, his shirt wrinkled. "Please, open up. I need to talk." Every instinct told me not to open the door, but curiosity won. I cracked it open, leaving the chain on. "What do you want?" "Please." There was so much desperation in his voice that I faltered, unlatched the chain and let him in, but I left the door ajar just in case. Eduardo walked into the living room, looked around. "Nothing's changed." "It's only been 2 weeks. What do you want?" He sank heavily onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. "I wanted to apologize. For everything. For being a bad husband, a bad father, for dragging you into my dirty business." I was silent, not knowing what to say. It was so unexpected, so unlike the Eduardo I remembered. "You have no idea what started after that trial. The tax authorities began digging, found more documents. Turns out I wasn't the only one. Half the company's management was doing the same thing. Now they're all going to prison. And you came here so I would pity you? No, I came to warn you. My former partners won't forgive me for letting all this filth come to light. They might try to get to you, to Valentina. Be careful." A chill ran down my spine. "Are you threatening me?" "No. God, no. I'm warning you. I'm leaving. Tonight. Far away. For a long time. Maybe forever. But I wanted to make sure you'd be safe." He pulled an envelope from his pocket and placed it on the coffee table. "Here are the names and phone numbers of people who can help if anything happens. And some money. Not much, but at least something." I looked at the envelope, then at Eduardo. This was a different man, broken, lost, but for the first time in all our years of marriage, sincere. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you and Valentina aren't guilty of my sins. You deserve a normal life without constantly looking over your shoulder." He got up and walked to the door. At the threshold, he turned back. "Tell Valentina her daddy loves her, always has. He just never knew how to show it." And then he left. I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the closed door. Then I picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside, there really was money, about $15,000, and a sheet of paper with names and phone numbers. Some of the surnames I recognized. They belonged to influential people in the city, the ones Eduardo had once done business with. I didn't sleep all night thinking about my ex-husband's strange visit. Should I believe him or not? Was it another manipulation or sincere remorse? And who were these people who might threaten me and my daughter? In the morning, Rosarita called. Her voice was agitated. "I have news." Eduardo withdrew his appeal. I just got the notice. The original ruling stands. I couldn't believe my ears. Withdrew it? Why? I don't know the details. His lawyer only said the client had decided not to contest the divorce or the division of property. So Eduardo had kept his word. He really had left, giving Valentina and me the chance to start a new life. I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. On one hand, the legal battles were over. On the other, Eduardo's warning about possible danger lingered in my mind. The next few days passed in tense anticipation. I took Valentina to school and picked her up myself, trusting no one else. I scanned the surroundings carefully, noting any suspicious detail. But nothing happened. The city lived its usual life, people hurrying about their business, not paying us any attention. Gradually, I began to relax. Maybe Eduardo had exaggerated the threat, or maybe his former partners decided not to mess with a divorced wife and her child. Either way, life went on, and I had to move forward. It was then that Alejandro entered our lives. I've already mentioned him, but now I'll tell you in more detail how we met. It happened at a school meeting at the end of September. Valentina had just started second grade, and it was my first time attending without Eduardo. I felt uncomfortable among all the married couples, as if I had divorcee written on my forehead. Alejandro was sitting in the last row, also alone, tall, thin, in a simple gray sweater and jeans. When the teacher asked the parents to introduce themselves, he stood and said quietly, "Alejandro Velázquez, father of Manuel Velázquez." His voice was pleasant, deep, with a slight huskiness. I couldn't help noticing that there was no ring on his finger. After the meeting, the parents usually split into groups, chatting about school matters. I was about to leave right away when Valentina ran up to me in the hallway with a boy. "Mom, this is Manuel!" We sit at the same desk. "Can he come over to our house?" I hesitated, unsure what to say. Then Alejandro approached. "Sorry if Manuel is bothering you. He's a very sociable boy." "No, not at all. Valentina is happy to have a new friend." We left the school together. The children ran ahead, chattering excitedly. It turned out Alejandro and his son had recently moved to our neighborhood. He'd gotten a job as a physics teacher at the nearby high school. "And Manuel's mother?" I asked cautiously. Alejandro's face darkened. "She passed away 2 years ago, cancer." "I'm sorry. It's all right. We're learning to move on. Isn't that right, Manuel?" The boy turned, nodded, but there was a shadow of sadness in his eyes. We reached the intersection where our paths parted. The children didn't want to separate, begging us to let them play a little longer. Alejandro suggested going to a nearby park. It had a nice playground. I agreed, though I was usually wary of people I barely knew. In the park, we sat on a bench, watching the children play. The conversation flowed easily, without tension. Alejandro talked about his work, about how difficult it had been to decide on the move. But in the old city, there had been too many memories. I shared that I, too, was raising a child alone, though for a different reason. "Divorce?" he asked. I nodded. "Fresh. Just finalized." "Hard?" "It depends." Sometimes I think I should have done it sooner. So many wasted years. I don't think they were wasted. You have a daughter? That alone means they weren't wasted. His words touched me. He was right. Valentina was worth all those years of suffering. From that day on, we started seeing each other regularly, at first by chance, at school, in the store, in the park. Then we began arranging to meet on purpose. The children became close friends, always begging to visit each other. The first time Manuel came to our house was a week after we met. Valentina showed him her toys, her books. They drew together. I was cooking dinner, glancing at them from the kitchen. There was something soothing in that picture, something that felt right. Alejandro came to pick up his son around 8 in the evening. He apologized for keeping him so late. I offered coffee. He accepted. We sat in the kitchen while the children finished watching a cartoon. We talked about school, about the kids, about books. It turned out we both loved Borges and Garcia Marquez. Both couldn't stand reality shows. Both preferred coffee to hot chocolate. "Do you know why I decided to move here of all places?" he asked suddenly. "My wife dreamed of this neighborhood. She used to say, when Manuel grows older, we'll move, buy an apartment overlooking the park. We didn't manage it in her lifetime, but I thought, maybe she'd be glad that we came here after all." There was no anguish in his voice, only quiet sadness and a warm memory. I thought how lucky he had been in his marriage. Even after losing his wife, he spoke of her with such love. And I, after 10 years with my husband, felt nothing but fatigue and disappointment. In October, the first incident happened that reminded me of Eduardo's warning. I was coming home from school late one evening. I had stayed behind grading papers. Valentina was at my parents', so I wasn't in a rush. Already near the building entrance, I felt someone following me. I turned. No one. But the sense of another's presence wouldn't go away. I quickly unlocked the door to the building and ran inside. Through the glass, I saw a man's figure standing at the entrance. He lingered for a few seconds, then turned and left. My heart pounded wildly. Maybe just a coincidence? Maybe he had the wrong address. The next day it happened again. And the day after, too. Always the same man in a dark hooded jacket, his face hidden. I started to panic. I went to the police, but they only shrugged. He's not doing anything. Just walking down the street. Not harassing, not threatening, no grounds for detention. I told Rosarita she advised hiring a private security guard, at least temporarily, but that was too expensive. My teacher's salary wouldn't cover it. Then I remembered Eduardo's envelope. I pulled out the sheet with phone numbers and found one marked Roberto, security. I hesitated a long time before calling, but when the stranger appeared near Valentina's school, I decided. Roberto turned out to be a retired police colonel, an old acquaintance of Eduardo's. He listened attentively and promised to handle it. 2 days later, he called me back. The problem is solved. The man who was bothering you won't appear again. Who was he? Doesn't matter. What matters is the threat is gone, but be careful, just in case. And if anything happens, call me right away. I thanked him, though the unease lingered. Who were these people? What did they want? And had the danger really passed? Alejandro noticed my tension. By then we were already quite close, meeting almost every day. He asked me directly what was going on. I told him. Not everything, of course. I left out the document and Eduardo's schemes. I only said my ex-husband had warned me about possible problems because of his debts. Alejandro's face darkened. Maybe you should leave for a while? Go to your parents. I can't. Work, Valentina's school, and I don't want to spend my whole life running and hiding. Then let me meet you after work and pick Valentina up from school. It's safer together. His offer touched me. A man who was, essentially, still a stranger, was ready to spend his time to protect me and my daughter. Thank you, but I can't burden you like that. It's no burden. Manuel goes to the same school and mine is nearby. It's no trouble at all. And so Alejandro became part of our daily life. In the mornings, we walked the children to school together. In the evenings, we picked them up together. Sometimes we stopped at a cafe, had coffee with dulce de leche pastries. The kids loved those outings. Valentina had grown completely comfortable with Alejandro, chattering nonstop, telling him about her day. Manuel had softened too, smiling more often. In November, Alejandro invited us to a theater performance, a children's play based on Andersen. I spent a long time choosing what to wear. For the first time in many years, I wanted to look pretty not out of obligation, but for myself, and, if I was honest, for Alejandro. I wore a dark green dress, the same one I'd worn on my last anniversary with Eduardo, but now it no longer reminded me of the bad. It felt as if it had gained a second life. The play was wonderful. Valentina and Manuel sat wide-eyed, captivated by the hero's adventures. I stole glances at Alejandro. He was watching the stage, but now and then his eyes moved to the children, and his face softened. During intermission, he bought everyone ice cream, helped Valentina with a napkin when she dripped some on her dress. After the play, we went to a cafe, the kids animatedly discussing what they'd seen, arguing over which character was the bravest. Alejandro and I just smiled quietly, watching them, At some point, our eyes met and I felt something stir inside me, a long-forgotten feeling I thought had died along with my youthful illusions. At home, after putting Valentina to bed, I stood at the window for a long time. Outside, the first snow was falling, big flakes drifting slowly in the glow of the streetlights. I thought about Alejandro, about what was happening between us. Did I have the right to start a new relationship? Was it too soon after the divorce? And what would Valentina think? The answer to that last question came the next morning. My daughter herself brought it up over breakfast. "Mom, Uncle Alejandro is nice, isn't he?" "Yes, he's nice. And Manuel says his dad is lonely, just like you." I nearly choked on my coffee. "And? Maybe you don't have to be lonely anymore. It's more fun together." Children's logic in its simplicity is often wiser than adult reasoning, and she was right. Life really was more fun together. In December, the cold hit hard, the harshest winter in 10 years. -30 with wind and blizzards. Schools were closed. Valentina stayed home, and I took sick leave to watch her. On the third day of this forced vacation, Alejandro called. "My pipe burst. No heating, no water. The plumbers said it'll take at least 2 days to fix. Can we come over?" "Of course, come." They arrived an hour later with backpacks. Manuel brought board games. Valentina squealed with delight. She gave them a tour of the apartment, showing where they would sleep. Manuel in her room on a folding bed borrowed from the neighbors, Alejandro on the sofa in the living room. The first evening passed surprisingly easily and naturally. We cooked dinner together. Alejandro made a salad, I boiled dumplings, the children set the table. Then we played board games, laughed, joked. Valentina was happier than ever. She finally had the older brother she had always dreamed of. When the children went to bed, Alejandro and I stayed in the kitchen. We drank coffee, speaking softly so as not to wake them. He told me about his wife, about how hard it had been after her death, how Manuel had shut down, stopped talking, and how a psychologist had advised him to change their environment. "You know," he said, "this is the first time in 2 years I've seen him so alive like now. Valentina works miracles, and Manuel too. Valentina always dreamed of a brother or sister, but—" I stopped, not wanting to recall how Eduardo had flatly refused to have a second child, said one was more than enough. "They make a good pair," Alejandro smiled. "They complement each other." We sat close, our elbows almost touching. I felt the warmth of his body, the fresh scent of his cologne, with a hint of pine. My heart beat faster than usual. "Thank you for taking us in," he said quietly. "It's nothing. We're glad." He turned toward me, and our faces were suddenly very close. I saw golden flecks in his brown eyes, a small mole at his temple I had never noticed before. Time seemed to stop. We looked at each other, and the whole world narrowed to this moment, this kitchen, the two of us. Then Valentina's voice called from the bedroom, "Mom, can I have some water?" The moment was broken. I jumped up and went to her, but the sense of something important, something that had almost happened, lingered. The 2 days Alejandro and Manuel stayed with us passed like a single instant. We were like a real family, having breakfast together, walking in the snowy park, building a snowman in the yard. In the evenings, we watched movies under blankets. The children would fall asleep leaning against each other, and we'd carry them to bed. On the last evening, when the heating in Alejandro's apartment was finally fixed, no one wanted to part. Manuel dragged out the packing of his toys. Valentina followed him around, forgetting. One thing after another. Alejandro wasn't in a hurry either. "Maybe you should stay one more night, just in case something happens again," I suggested. He smiled. Tempting offer. "But we'd better go. School tomorrow. We need to get ready." At the door, he lingered. "These were the best days of the past 2 years." "Thank you. They were wonderful for us, too." He leaned down and kissed me on the cheek, lightly, almost weightlessly, but that touch sent shivers down my skin. After they left, the apartment felt empty and quiet. Valentina was sad, reluctant to go to bed. "Mom, why can't they live with us all the time?" "They have their own home, sweetheart. But we could live in one big house, so there's room for everyone, right?" I hugged my daughter, not knowing how to answer. In her child's world, everything was simple. If people were happy together, then they should be together. Adults were the ones who complicated things. That night, I had a strange dream. I was standing in the courtroom, holding that very document. But when I opened it, the pages were blank, just a white sheet. Eduardo laughed. The judge shook her head, and I couldn't understand what was happening. I woke in a cold sweat. The dream turned out to be prophetic. The next day, Rosarita called. "We have a problem. Do you remember the document you presented in court? The prosecutor's office has started an inquiry, and the experts claim it may be a forgery." The floor dropped out from under me. "A forgery? That's impossible." "I think so, too." But the analysis showed that the ink on the document is fresh, no more than 6 months old, while the contract itself is dated 3 years earlier. I sank onto the couch, trying to process what I'd just heard. "But I found it in Eduardo's office, in his folder, among his other papers." "I believe you," Rosarita said, "but we need proof. Otherwise, they could accuse you of fabricating evidence." After the call with my lawyer, I paced the apartment like a caged animal. How could this be? The document was real. I had seen it, held it in my hands. Could Eduardo have switched it somehow? But when? And why? That evening, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Patricia. I didn't want to open it, but curiosity won. "What do you want?" She walked in without invitation, went straight into the living room. She looked triumphant. "I came to see your face when you learned the truth." "What truth?" "About the document. It really was a forgery. Eduardo created it deliberately to test you, and you fell for it like a fool." I couldn't believe my ears. "Why would he do that?" "To give him grounds for divorce on his terms. If you had used a forged document in court, you'd have been accused of fraud. Valentina would have stayed with her father and the apartment too, but you turned out to be trickier. Or maybe just lucky." My mind reeled. All this time I had thought I was holding a trump card against Eduardo, when in fact it was a trap. But the court believed it. The ruling went in my favor, because Eduardo got scared. When you started producing evidence that he hadn't been away on that business trip, he realized his plan had failed. If it came out that he himself had forged the document, he'd go to prison, so he decided to back down. And ran away. Not ran away, left, to start a new life somewhere no one knows him. Patricia stood and headed for the door. At the threshold, she turned. "But this isn't over. The prosecutor's office will get to the bottom of it, and then we'll see who has the last laugh." After she left, I collapsed onto the couch. My head was spinning. If the document really was a forgery, what would happen to the court's decision? Would it be overturned? Would the case be reopened? And what if they accused me of knowingly submitting false evidence? I called Rosarita and repeated everything Patricia had said. The lawyer listened silently, then replied, "Don't panic. Even if the document is fake, you didn't know it. You used it in good faith. At worst, the case could be reviewed. But we have other evidence of your ex-husband's misconduct." Her words calmed me a little, but the anxiety wouldn't let go. That evening, Alejandro and Manuel came by. They brought pizza, deciding to have a little celebration. Valentina squealed with joy and ran off with Manuel to her room, leaving me and Alejandro in the kitchen. He noticed my state right away. "What's wrong?" "You're pale as a sheet." I hadn't wanted to tell him, but the words spilled out about the document, the inquiry, Patricia's visit. Alejandro listened attentively without interrupting. And do you believe the document is really a forgery? I don't know what to think. The analysis seems clear. Analyses can be wrong too. And besides, if your ex-husband really forged the document to frame you, why didn't he see it through? Logical. I hadn't thought of that. Maybe he got scared? Or maybe the document is real, and now they're trying to present it as a forgery. Did your ex-husband have influential friends? He did, and apparently still does, if my mother-in-law is so confident she's right. Alejandro thought for a moment. You know, I have a friend. He works in a forensic lab, an independent expert. Maybe we should get a second opinion, a ray of hope. Is that even possible? Why not? You're entitled to an independent examination. The next day, we met Alejandro's friend, Ignacio, a man in his 60s with a neat beard and sharp eyes. He examined the copy of the document I still had and shook his head. Interesting case. From this copy, it could be genuine or a very good fake. I'd need the original to be sure. It's with the prosecutor's office. Then you'll need to file a motion for re-examination. I'd be willing to serve as expert. Rosarita filed the motion. After a week of agonizing waiting, the response came, approved. A new forensic analysis was scheduled. Ignacio worked for 2 days using special methods I couldn't even pronounce, spectral analysis, chromatography, and other technical terms. When he called with the results, I held the phone in trembling hands. The document is authentic. The ink's age matches the date. The first examination was faulty. They used outdated methods. I exhaled. A weight lifted from my chest. You're sure? Absolutely. More than that, I found microscopic traces showing the document had been stored for years in the same place. Dust, tobacco smoke particles, microfibers of paper. Everything points to authenticity. With the results of the second analysis, Rosarita went to the prosecutor's office. The case against me was closed. What's more, they opened an inquiry into why the first analysis had given a false result. It turned out the expert who conducted the first test was an old acquaintance of Patricia's. They had studied at the same university and kept in touch. Coincidence? Hardly. When it was all over, I felt immense relief, as if a mountain had been lifted from my shoulders. I called Alejandro to share the good news. He suggested we celebrate. Let's all go out somewhere, the 4 of us. The kids deserve a party after all this stress. We went to an amusement park. Despite the winter, some indoor pavilions were open. The children were overjoyed, riding carousels, playing arcade games, eating cotton candy. Valentina and Manuel held hands, inseparable. At one point, Alejandro and I found ourselves alone. The kids had run off to another ride. We stood watching them, and suddenly I felt his hand slip into mine. Warm, steady, right. Thank you, I said, for everything. For your support. For your help. For being there. I want to be there, he answered quietly, if you'll let me. I turned to him, meeting his gaze. In his eyes, I saw tenderness, care, and something more. Something I was afraid to name, yet that warmed my soul. I'll let you, I whispered. He leaned down and our lips met. The first kiss was cautious, almost weightless, as if we were both afraid to break the moment. But then I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulled him closer, and the kiss deepened, grew surer. When we finally drew back, we saw the children standing nearby, grinning from ear to ear. "Hooray!" shouted Valentina. "Now we're a real family." Manuel nodded, smiling too. Alejandro pulled his son close. I hugged Valentina. The 4 of us stood together, and the world around us felt perfect. Of course, it was only the beginning. Ahead lay countless conversations, decisions, compromises. We had to figure out how to build our life together, where to live, how to merge 2 families into one. But in that moment, all of it seemed solvable. What mattered was that we were together and wanted to be together. A month later, Alejandro proposed, not with pomp or ceremony, but simply one evening as we sat in the kitchen, drinking coffee. He suddenly said, "Marry me." I nearly choked on my coffee. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated calmly. "I love you." "Valentina feels like my own daughter. Manuel adores you both. We're already a family, just without a stamp in the passport." "But we've only known each other a few months." "So what?" "I knew my first wife for 5 years before we married, but that didn't mean I loved her more or less. Love isn't measured by time." He was right. Time didn't matter. In those few months, Alejandro had become closer to me than Eduardo had in 10 years of marriage. And the kids? Let's ask them. We called the children and sat them down on the couch. Alejandro looked at them seriously. "Valentina's mom and I have an important question. How would you feel if we got married?" Valentina bounced on the couch with joy. Manuel smiled his restrained smile and nodded. "That would be great," he said. "Valentina would be my real sister." "And you'd be my real brother," she finished. They hugged and tears pricked my eyes. Good, happy tears. "Well," Alejandro turned to me, "the kids are on board. Now it's your turn." I looked at him, at the children, at our little kitchen where we all sat together drinking coffee, and realized this was exactly what I had wanted all my life. A real family, built on love, trust, and mutual respect. "Yes," I said. "My answer is yes." The wedding was set for February. Simple, intimate, only our parents and a few close friends. My mother cried with happiness. My father awkwardly hugged Alejandro and called him son. Alejandro's parents came from another city, kind, down-to-earth people who immediately clicked with mine. Valentina was my bridesmaid. Manuel carried the rings, both of them solemn and proud. When Alejandro and I exchanged rings, Valentina whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Now no one will ever be lonely again." After the ceremony, we went to a small, cozy restaurant with a fireplace and live music. We danced, laughed, celebrated. At one point, I stepped aside to the window, looking at the snowy street. I remembered that day in court when Eduardo had hurled his cruel words at me. How far away it all seemed, like another life. Alejandro came up behind me and wrapped me in his arms. "What are you thinking about?" "About how strange life is. A year ago, I thought mine was over, and now it's just beginning," he finished for me. And it was true. Life was only just beginning. After the wedding, we decided to stay in my apartment. It was bigger, and the kids didn't want to change their familiar surroundings. Alejandro sold his place and put the money into a fund for the children's education. We set up our shared home together, rearranged furniture, hung new curtains, bought a large dining table that could fit our whole new family. Life flowed calmly and steadily. In the mornings, Alejandro and I walked the children to school, then went off to our own classrooms, me still teaching the little ones, him teaching physics to high school students. Evenings we spent together, dinners, homework, board games, or simply talking. Valentina blossomed, from a quiet, withdrawn girl into a lively, laughing chatterbox. Manuel changed too, becoming more open, smiling more often. They truly became like siblings, sometimes bickering over trifles, but always making up quickly. In March, something happened that brought the past rushing back. Rosarita called to say that the prosecutor's office had completed its investigation into the fraudulent contract. New details had come to light, and the investigator wanted to speak with me. The meeting was set for the next day. I went to the prosecutor's office with my heart pounding. What else could have surfaced? Were troubles beginning again? The investigator, a young man with observant eyes, greeted me politely, offered me coffee. Then he pulled out a thick folder of documents. "We've completed the investigation into your ex-husband, and I'd like to share with you some details that concern you." I tensed. "The document you presented in court is genuine." Moreover, it turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg. We uncovered an entire money laundering scheme through the construction company where Eduardo worked. And what does that mean for me? For you, it means that part of the money tied to that scheme could be confiscated as illicitly obtained, including the apartment you fought for. I felt the ground slipping from under my feet. After everything, was I about to lose the apartment? But, the investigator continued, noticing my expression, since you didn't know about the origin of the money and were yourself deceived, we won't insist on confiscation under one condition. What condition? You must testify against the participants in the scheme. Tell us everything you know about your ex-husband's financial dealings. I hesitated. On the one hand, I knew very little. Eduardo had never shared his business affairs with me. On the other, I did remember certain details, strange phone calls, meetings with people he introduced as business partners, documents he hid in the safe. I'll tell you everything I know, I decided, though it isn't much. Any information will be useful. For the next 2 hours, I answered questions, recalling details, dates, names. The investigator wrote everything down, sometimes asking for clarification. When we finished, he thanked me and said another meeting might be necessary. And one more thing, he added as I was about to leave. Your ex-husband has been placed on the international wanted list. If he tries to contact you, notify us immediately. At home, I told Alejandro about the meeting. He listened in silence, then pulled me into his arms. The important thing is, the apartment stays with us. The rest, we'll handle. But what if Eduardo really does try to reach out? Or his partners? We'll be careful. And besides, so much time has passed. If they'd wanted to act, they would have already. He was right, but the unease lingered. For the next few weeks, I constantly looked over my shoulder, checking if anyone was following me, but nothing happened. The city went on with its life. Spring came into full bloom, and slowly I began to relax. In April, Valentina took part in a school concert. She sang in the choir and recited poetry. We sat in the hall, Alejandro, Manuel, my parents, and me. When Valentina stepped on stage in a white dress with a bow in her hair, my heart ached with pride and tenderness. My little girl, so beautiful, so talented, so happy. After the concert, we held a family dinner. My mother baked Valentina's favorite cherry pie. My father opened a bottle of wine for the adults. The kids drank juice. We sat around the big table, laughing, sharing funny childhood stories. At one point, I looked around at everyone, my new, bigger family, and thought, this is happiness. Not money, not prestige, not expensive things, but loved ones by your side, the warmth of home, the laughter of children. In May, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a photo. Eduardo standing on some tropical beach, tanned in shorts and a t-shirt, nothing like the polished businessman I once knew. On the back, a short message. Forgive me for everything. Be happy, E. I stared at the photograph for a long time, trying to understand my feelings. There was no anger, no resentment, only a strange sadness for what could have been, but never was. I showed the photo to Alejandro. Will you tell the investigator? He asked. I thought, then shook my head. No, let him live his life, far away from us. Alejandro nodded, understanding. He took the photo, tore it into tiny pieces, and threw it into the trash. Symbolic and right. The past belonged in the past. That summer, we went on our first vacation together, as a family, to the seaside in a small resort town. We rented a cottage right on the beach, 2 weeks of sun, sea, and carefree joy. The children spent their days splashing in the water, building sandcastles. Alejandro and I read under the shade, sometimes joining in their games. One evening, after the children had fallen asleep, we sat on the veranda, listening to the sound of the surf. Alejandro held my hand, and we sat in silence, the kind where no words are needed. You know, he said suddenly, I thought after my wife's death, I'd never be happy again, that I'd just go on existing for Manuel's sake. And then you came along. And I thought love was an illusion, that in real life there was only calculation and convenience. You proved me wrong. We kissed under the starry sky, and the world around us felt perfect. Of course, I knew perfect worlds didn't exist, that difficulties, problems, and trials lay ahead. But I also knew we would manage. Together. In the fall came unexpected news. Patricia called. I didn't recognize her voice at first. It was weak, trembling. "I need your help," she said without preamble. "What happened?" "I'm in the hospital." "A stroke. There's no one with me. Eduardo has disappeared. Relatives turned their backs after the scandal. I'm not asking for much. Just, could Valentina come visit me? She is my granddaughter." I was silent, unsure how to respond. This woman had caused me so much pain, so much humiliation, but she was still my daughter's grandmother, whether she liked it or not. "I'll ask Valentina," I finally said. "If she wants to, we'll come." Valentina listened carefully with a seriousness beyond her years. "Grandma Patricia is sick?" "Yes." "And she has no one?" "It seems so." "Then we should visit." You can't abandon sick people, even if they were wrong. Once again, a child's wisdom stunned me. The next day, we went to the hospital. Patricia lay in her bed, pale, gaunt. When she saw us, she burst into tears. "Thank you for coming." I didn't expect it. Valentina went to her bedside, took her hand. "Grandma, you'll get better. You just have to want it." The old woman looked at her granddaughter with a tenderness I had never seen in her eyes before. "I was a fool," she said, looking at me. "All my life I thought money and status were what mattered most. But it turns out the most important thing is family. And I lost everyone because of my pride." I didn't know what to say. Too much lay between us to forgive so easily, but seeing her so pitiful, so alone, was painful. "We'll visit you," I finally said. "Valentina will come." "Thank you. I don't deserve more than that." We began visiting Patricia once a week. Valentina brought her drawings, told her about school. Slowly, the old woman began to recover. The doctors said the granddaughter's attention worked miracles. A month later, she was discharged. It turned out she had sold her apartment to pay Eduardo's debts. She had nowhere to live. Social services suggested a nursing home, but Valentina objected. "Mom, let Grandma live with us." "Our apartment is big." I was stunned by the suggestion. To live under the same roof with the woman who had poisoned my life for so many years. "Valentina, that's complicated." "But she's alone. And she's my grandmother, my only one." That evening, we discussed it with Alejandro. To my surprise, he wasn't entirely against it. People change. Especially after something like this. Maybe she deserves a chance, but I know. But Valentina's right. You can't abandon family, even if they were wrong. In the end, we decided to try. We gave Patricia a small room we'd been using as storage. We put in a bed, a wardrobe, a table. It wasn't much, but for her, it was salvation. The first weeks were tense. Patricia behaved quietly, almost invisibly, helping around the house, watching the children when we were late at work. Not a single critical remark, not a single disapproving glance, as if she were a different woman. One evening, after the children went to bed, she came into the kitchen. "I want to tell you the truth." "About that document." I stiffened. "What truth?" "Eduardo really was laundering money, but not of his own free will. He was drawn in, blackmailed. He had debts, huge ones. He played the stock market, lost everything. Took out loans, lost those too. And then those people appeared, offering a solution. He agreed, thinking it was temporary, but such things are never temporary." "You knew?" I suspected but didn't want to believe. My son, my golden boy, couldn't be a criminal. I convinced myself it was just business, that everyone did it. And the forgery of the document? It was true. Eduardo really did create a fake to frame you, but then he switched it for the genuine document. He wanted you to win the case, for the apartment and Valentina to stay with you. That was his way of protecting you from those people. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But then why all the theatrics, the threats, the appeal? To deflect suspicion. If he had just surrendered everything without a fight, his partners would have suspected something. This way it looked like you fought for it and won on your own. My head was spinning. So Eduardo hadn't been a complete villain? He had been trying to protect us, even if by such strange methods? Why are you telling me this now? Because you and Valentina gave me a second chance. Because I'm tired of lies and secrets. And because you have the right to know the truth. After that conversation, my attitude toward Patricia began to change. I couldn't forgive the past, but I could see she was truly remorseful and trying to change. And Valentina adored her grandmother. They could spend hours together, reading, drawing, playing board games. Manuel grew attached to Patricia, too. For him, she became the grandmother he'd never really had. His grandmothers lived far away. Visits were rare. But here was a grandmother always nearby, always ready to listen, to help, to support. By New Year, our strange family had fully taken shape. Alejandro and me, the children Valentina and Manuel, and Grandma Patricia. 5 people bound not always by blood, but by something greater. Love, forgiveness, acceptance. For the holidays, we decided to go to the countryside and rent a house. We wanted a real winter, sledding, skiing, snowmen. We found a wonderful place 2 hours from the city. A big wooden house with a stove, a sauna, and a spacious yard. We celebrated New Year's Eve together, decorated a tree Alejandro and Manuel had cut down in the forest, with the forester's permission, of course. Cooked a festive dinner. Everyone contributed something. I made salads, Alejandro grilled meat, Patricia baked her signature cake. The children helped with everything. At midnight, we made wishes. Valentina wished that we would always be together. Manuel wished we'd go camping in the new year. Patricia silently gazed at the candle, and I saw a tear roll down her cheek. Alejandro hugged me and whispered his wish in my ear, that we would have a baby. I froze. We'd never discussed it. I was 35, Alejandro 40. We each had children from our first marriages, but the idea of having a child together both frightened and enticed me. "Are you serious?" I whispered. "Absolutely, if you're not against it." "I need to think." "Of course." "It's just a wish. It may never come true." But the seed had been planted. Over the next days, I kept thinking about the possibility of another child, imagining a tiny person who might resemble Alejandro or me, a brother or sister for Valentina and Manuel. In February, on our wedding anniversary, I gave Alejandro a small box. Inside were a pair of tiny baby booties and a pregnancy test with 2 bright lines. Alejandro stared at the gift for several seconds, not believing his eyes. Then he looked at me, his face full of hope and joy. Is it true? It's true. 8 weeks. He swept me up in his arms and spun me around. We laughed and cried at the same time. We told the children over dinner. Valentina squealed with delight. Manuel smiled his quiet smile. Patricia wept. "I never thought I'd live to see this. Thank you for such a gift." The pregnancy went smoothly. I worked until maternity leave and felt wonderful. Valentina and Manuel took turns suggesting names for the baby, arguing over who would teach him to ride a bike. In August, Javier was born, small, wrinkled, with chubby cheeks and an astonishingly serious gaze. Alejandro cried when he first held him. Valentina and Manuel gazed at their little brother with adoration. Patricia held her grandson and whispered something that sounded like a prayer. The first months were hard. Sleepless nights, colic, teething. But we managed together as a family. Patricia became indispensable, getting up with the baby at night so we could sleep, cooking, cleaning, watching the older children. "This is my way of atoning," she said. "For all the years I was a bad mother-in-law and grandmother." By Javier's first birthday, life had settled into a routine. In the mornings, we walked the older kids to school, then I stayed home with the baby while Alejandro went to work. Patricia helped around the house. In the evenings, we gathered together, had dinner, shared our day's news. That was when the last news of Eduardo arrived. The investigator who had handled the money laundering case called me. "I want to inform you that Eduardo has been found." My heart skipped a beat. Where? In Thailand. He had been living there under a false name. The local police detained him at our request. And now? Extradition, trial, most likely a real sentence. You may be called as a witness. I see. There's one more thing. He asked us to pass you a letter. It has been cleared. I can forward you a scan. Send it. The letter arrived an hour later, 3 pages long. Eduardo wrote about how deeply he regretted everything, how I had been right to leave him, how Valentina deserved a better father. He asked his mother's forgiveness for letting her down. And at the end, something unexpected. "I know you got married, had a child. The investigator slipped up. I'm happy for you, truly happy. You deserve happiness, and so does Valentina. Tell her her father loves her, even if he was a bad father. When I get out, if I get out, I won't disturb you. I'll start a new life somewhere far away. Maybe I'll become better. Maybe not. But you will be happy. I'm sure of it. Farewell. E." I showed the letter to Patricia. She read it slowly several times, then carefully folded the paper. My boy. He lost his way, but there's still something human left in him. "Do you want to see him when they bring him back?" She shook her head. "No, the Eduardo I loved, the one I was proud of, he no longer exists. This man, I don't know him. Let him face his demons alone." Eduardo's trial went quickly. He admitted guilt, cooperated with the investigation. He got 5 years, with time already served in detention. I wasn't called. My written testimony was enough. Valentina asked only once what had happened to her father. I explained as gently as possible that he had made mistakes and now was paying for them. She nodded and never asked again. She had a new family, a loving stepfather, siblings. The past no longer had power over her. Time passed. Javier grew, started walking, talking. His first word was mama, second papa, third baba. Patricia cried with happiness when she heard that baba meant for her. Valentina entered 5th grade and became passionate about music. Manuel discovered a talent for drawing. Both adored their little brother, though sometimes they were jealous of the attention he got. On the 3rd anniversary of my wedding to Alejandro, something happened that brought everything full circle. That morning, the doorbell rang. A courier stood on the doorstep with a large envelope. "For you," from a notary. Inside were documents, Eduardo's will. He had left Valentina a large sum in a Swiss bank account. Where had it come from? Apparently, before all the trouble began, he had opened an account in his daughter's name, transferring part of his earnings there. Legal money from his early career. Attached was a note from the notary. Eduardo had drawn up the will before his extradition, anticipating he might never leave prison. He wanted to provide for his daughter. The sum was significant, enough to cover tuition at any university in the world, to buy an apartment, to start a business. But Valentina was still a minor, so the decision was up to Alejandro and me. "Let it sit until she turns 18, we agreed. Then she can decide for herself." When Patricia learned about the will, she quietly said, He did take care of his daughter after all. Too late, in his own way, but he did. That evening, we had a family dinner. Nothing special, just all of us together. Patricia made the children's favorite empanadas. Alejandro opened a bottle of wine. The kids played with the baby. Laughter filled the room. I looked at them all and thought about the strange path that had led me here. From an unhappy marriage, humiliation and betrayal, to a real family, love and happiness, from loneliness and fear to confidence and peace. I remembered that day in court when Eduardo spat his cruel words at me. How far away it seemed now, like another lifetime. That day, I had pulled out the document, which turned out to be part of a complicated game, a game with no winners. Or maybe there were? I hadn't defeated Eduardo or Patricia. I had defeated my fear, my insecurity, my dependence on others' opinions. I had found the strength to begin a new life. And that life turned out to be beautiful. "What are you thinking about?" Alejandro asked, hugging me from behind. "How good it is that everything turned out this way." "Even the hardships?" "Especially the hardships. Without them, we wouldn't be here." He kissed the top of my head. "I agree. There are many roads that lead to the good. The important thing is not to turn back." Valentina ran up to us holding a drowsy Javier in her arms. "Mama, Papa, he fell asleep right in the middle of playing." We smiled. Valentina had been calling Alejandro Papa for a long time now. Manuel called me Mama. We had become a true family, where blood ties mattered less than love and care for one another. I took the baby and went to tuck him into his crib. The children's room was quiet and cozy. Manuel's drawings hung on the walls. Valentina's crafts stood proudly on the shelves. In the corner sat a giant stuffed bear, a gift from Grandma Patricia. After settling Javier, I lingered for a moment, watching my sleeping son. Then I returned to the others. They were playing a board game, laughing, arguing about the rules. Patricia winked at me when Valentina cheated, moving her piece an extra square. I sat down next to Alejandro and laid my head on his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around me while still playing with the other hand. Valentina was talking excitedly. Manuel tried to correct her. Patricia laughed. And I thought, here it is, happiness. Not in great achievements, not in victories or accomplishments, but in these simple moments. The warmth of home, the laughter of children, the embrace of a loved one, forgiveness and acceptance, the chance to start over even when it feels like everything is lost. The story of that court document was now in the past, along with the document itself, which turned out to be both real and part of someone else's game, but it had served its purpose. It became the catalyst for change, the push into a new life, a life where I no longer feared tomorrow, no longer looked back with regret, no longer waited for betrayal from those close to me. I simply lived, loved, and knew that I deserved this happiness, that I had earned it through my struggles, my tears, my strength. And if someone asked me now whether I regretted anything, I would answer, no, it was all worth it. Every pain, every disappointment, every triumph led me to where I was meant to be, home, with my true family, with my happiness. That night, as I lay down beside Alejandro, I remembered for the last time Eduardo's words in court, "Good luck not starving to death." How pitiful they sounded now. Not only had I not starved, I had flourished. I had found everything I had ever dreamed of, and more. And the document, that single sheet of paper that had changed everything, no longer mattered. What mattered was what came after, how from the ashes of the old life, a new one had been born, how from pain grew joy, how from betrayal came trust, trust in new people, in new love, in myself. Falling asleep in my husband's arms, listening to the peaceful breathing of the children in the next rooms, I smiled. Life had proven wiser than all of us. It had led each person to where they were meant to be, Eduardo to justice and perhaps redemption, Patricia to an understanding of true values, me to real happiness. And this happiness wasn't a reward for suffering. It was the result of a choice. The choice to fight instead of surrender, to forgive instead of carrying the poison of resentment, to believe in love after betrayal, to give a second chance to myself, to others, to life itself. In the morning, I was woken by the patter of little feet. Javier clambered onto the bed and nestled between Alejandro and me. Valentina peeked in through the door, calling us to breakfast. Manuel shouted from the kitchen that the arepas were burning. Patricia grumbled that the children were always underfoot. An ordinary morning of an ordinary family, my family, and I knew this was only the beginning. Ahead lay years full of big and small events. Javier's first words, Valentina's and Manuel's graduations, their weddings, grandchildren, illnesses and recoveries, quarrels and reconciliations, tears and laughter. But whatever awaited us, I was ready, because by my side were people who loved me, whom I loved in return, and that love was stronger than any trials. I got out of bed, lifted Javier into my arms, and went to the kitchen. The whole family was already gathered there. Alejandro flipping arepas, Valentina setting the table, Manuel pouring juice, Patricia brewing coffee. When they saw me, everyone smiled. "Good morning," they said in chorus. "Good morning," I replied, feeling my heart overflow with love. And it truly was a good morning, like all the mornings in this home. A home that had become a fortress, a refuge, a place of strength, a home where the past had no power and the future brimmed with hope. A home where I had finally become myself, true, happy, and free, and it had been worth the fight.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.